Hey everyone, thanks for being here. I'm Daniel Dubois. I'm the founder and global chairman of Angels in YPO. We have with us Oskar Hartmann. Oskar is a serial investor and entrepreneur. He's invested in 70 companies and 14 of which have become unicorn angel investments, which is borderline unheard of when in the world of angel investing. We're going to dive into a lot of risks. So, Oskar, thanks so much for being here. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much, and good to see you again after our Angels Forum last week in the Dolomites.
Yeah. We'll absolutely have to dive into what we were doing in Italy together 2 weekends ago. So thank you for mentioning that. So anyone who's not familiar with YPO, it's an incredible group. There's over 35,000 chief executives. Everyone is rallied around this idea that the world needs better leaders. Angels in YPO, we've been around for a few years now. We've hosted incredible fireside chats with people such as Reid Hoffman, who's a co-founder of LinkedIn. We've hosted David Sachs, Alfred Lin, top investors from Sequoia, Andreessen Horowitz, top entrepreneurs like Nate Blacharczyk, who's co-founder Airbnb. And with us today, we have Oskar, who has a really interesting background. I just mentioned entrepreneurship and angel investing. He also holds a world record for rowing, which I'd love to hear about in more detail. He's a father of four. Just a world traveler that really seems like despite carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders at times, you're having a great time doing it. So I know you recently were in Antarctica. You told me in Italy about your trip that you have planned to the North Pole. So in YPO, there's often this exercise that we do called the lifeline, and we
Yeah,
don't need to go into
it's
forum
my favorite.
confidential
It's my
level of
favorite exercise in the
detail.
world.
Yeah, perfect. So maybe what we can do, and actually, I should preface there is no responsibility for the information that's discussed today. It's solely your responsibility to assess the suitability and risks associated with any business or financial opportunity discussed. So go in eyes wide open. Hopefully, you learned something here today. Oskar and myself will share purely from experience, but Oskar, before we talk about risk and angel investing, would love for you to just share with the audience a bit of what makes Oskar who he is and how you first started getting into entrepreneurship. So over to you.
Yeah. So the short story is that I was born in Kazakhstan, where there was a German settlement in Kazakhstan after they were sent there during the Second World War, and then we moved back to Germany in '89 when I was still a child. So I did my entire school and university, everything in Germany, and also moved to the US, which was a life-changing moment for me when I was 18. I did an exchange here. It was at the high school, Tuscarawas Valley High School in Ohio, and that's actually where I became an entrepreneur because I saw with my own eyes the success of Starbucks and all these internet shops that started appearing in 99. So when I returned to Germany 1 year later, it seemed to me like 100% probability that you can create the same type of internet stores in Germany, right? So I created my first internet store, was for the products that I liked the most at that time, which was fitness products, everything for sports nutrition. And that was one of the very first internet shops in Germany. And that's how I found my first success. So one of the defining things about me is that I have been moving all my life. I lived in so many places, in Japan, in Malaysia, in Ukraine, in Russia, 3 times in the US. I always return to the US because it's the most inspiring place. What's happening in the Silicon Valley at the moment is absolute. I just want to move again, and sometimes I moved into a new lifestyle, which I did for a while when I did just sports. So for a couple of years, I was focusing 100% on sports, living a mini life of a rower, and that's how I achieved some results there. Yeah, and so my main success was from business diffusion. So I looked at business models and how they kind of diffused around the world. How do they move to developing countries? And that's how I did all my investing in the first 10 years. That's not how I'm going to do my investing in the future, but in the first 10 years, I was just building with my own hands. I built 20 companies over the last 20 years since I started. 10 went out of business, 10 businesses I sold and made enough money to start investing in other entrepreneurs, and I've been pretty much investing in people who build the companies that I would have liked to build myself. And that's the main storyline of my life. Of course, there were many ups and downs, but to keep it short and to our topic, that's how I discovered the world entrepreneurship. And I was very lucky because I moved to this host family in the US, which happened to be entrepreneurs, and they explained to me how the world really works, how wealth is created, how wealth is then invested, and a lot of the things that kind of became the mantras of my life. That's what I learned in my US family in 99, because obviously coming from the Soviet Union, we didn't know anything about entrepreneurship or investing.
Right. And you started multiple companies that scaled to thousands of employees. And now you mentioned that the way that you viewed angel investing, and of course, incredible track record that's worked. So you had a formula that you followed as the companies that you would have liked to start. But of course, there's only so many hours in the day. Some people have more money than time, and some people have more time than money. So it looks like that's a great way for you to express yourself and make sure that you're supporting the ecosystem. But I want to dive into trends here. So you said that's the way that you typically have invested, but it's not the way that you'll invest moving forward. So why is there that change in framework? Walk us through a little bit of your methodology here.
Yeah, I think at the beginning I had to lower the risk because I became a father early, and I had two kids before I made any money. So I wanted to kind of maximize the chance of success. So I had to invest in proven business models, in proven ways to create value. And that's how I provided for my family. That project was completed, and I found my first success. I became somebody in mostly in developing economies like India, Dubai, and Brazil, and countries like that. But now I'm in a position to take more risk. Now I can kind of pursue opportunities that have a probability of less than 5% happening, right? So we can try to solve some of the problems that have not been solved in the world. We can try to build, companies and that support entrepreneurs that have a dream. And the definition of a dream for me is something that has a probability of less than 5% actually happening. And so the strategy has to change. And also, the world is becoming now more digital. So the business model diffusion stopped really working like it used in the past. So in the past, the future was already here, but it was not evenly distributed. So there were places that were falling really far behind, and it was almost like having a newspaper from the future. Like when I came from the US to Germany, I felt like I have a newspaper 7 years ahead. I knew exactly what's going to happen. It was clear that it would be first electronics, e-commerce, then it would be fashion, and fashion would follow like it was very predictable what would happen, and that makes it a little bit easier. But now I think the future is more evenly distributed. Mostly this is still the case, but now with the digital economy, it's more difficult to find opportunities like that. So we have to more build new things, and now unicorns appear all over the world. So the business models are invented now, not in the US first and then distributed, but they actually start appearing in Turkey, in Indonesia, in the US, in China, everywhere.
Right. Yeah. Not so much a copy paste, rinse and
Yeah.
repeat. Let's talk about risk. Tell us your perspective of risk when it comes to angel investing. Is this a crazy thing for people to consider doing? How do you think about portfolio construction and the type of exposure that you're opening yourself up to?
Yeah, the way I was thinking was when I sold my first company, actually two companies at the same week, I was 30 years old. So my first strategy was to put 80% back into venture. So it was very risk tolerant, my strategy. But the
Usually,
logic
for,
was,
for the audience, really quickly, usually it's 5 to 15%, right? So not
yeah.
80.
So I didn't do that. So my idea was that when is the right time to take risks? So my prediction was that my risk tolerance will keep going down over time. So when I'm going to be less able to take risk when I'm 40 to 50, 50 to 60, 60 to 70, and then over time also my time horizon becomes shorter, so my ability to take long term and do long term investments is going to go down, right? So I'm going to as less life is available. So I thought that's my logic that I followed back then. I said, okay, from 30 to 40, I want to be 80% venture. Now, now from 40 to 50, I'm reducing it to something like 50%. And I think probably the right proportion for a normal human being is probably 10%. But I have a very high tolerance. My risk tolerance is like my competitive advantage. So I'm absolutely perfectly able to do things that will most likely not work. Like that's a competitive advantage, I believe, in the world. And I'm able to support entrepreneurs who will where the most likely outcome is bankruptcy.
Right. Yeah. Let's talk about so yeah, that's your competitive advantage. What do you see in angel investors that make them great? What separates an average or below average angel investor compared to the power laws that we see in venture, right? If you look at the average returns of this as an asset class, it's controlled by, the top 1%. So what
Yeah.
makes those angel investors who they are?
Yeah, I believe a lot of people can be great angel investors because the world is very big and there's a lot of things in the world, a lot of segments, a lot of niches, and nobody can capture the entire truth. So the only like, every person has its unique. That's what we value in YPO, right? That's why we do forum, that each person has a unique prisma through which you see the like any problem you look at, you have 8 different views on what that means depending on your life history. And every person, has a unique lifeline, and that makes you most likely a successful angel. So the key components are, first, the most important, the communities that you are part of, and where you have your social capital in those communities. So there's a lot of communities. The world is now very fragmented. There's a lot of clubs and a lot of communities, alumni networks, all kinds of social lifts, fellowship programs, scholarship programs. So the networks that you belong to, they become either more successful or less successful. And this is what you like every each one of us has unique. Like I have, for example, the rowing community, like people know me, I know people, and it's unique, right? I have that, and I have YPO, and I have my alumni community from my university. So WHU, the university where I studied, is responsible for 4 unicorns in my portfolio. So I was a seed investor in 10% of all German unicorns, and all of them came from the WHU community. So at some point, I checked all my emails, and if I had invested in every single introduction from the WHU network, I would have been a seed investor in 20% of all German unicorns. So actually, I did worse by cherry picking than if I had indexed the entire community. So, my entire brain just did damage at the end. So the WHU community was a huge component. So I'm so grateful. So what are the communities that you're part of? Then in India, I happened to invest for the first, like it was also a community of entrepreneurs, and that's how I did my first investment in India. And this particular community became extremely successful. They were kind of helping each other, and so I did 7 investments in India, and 4 out of 7 became unicorns. And this is impossible to explain by statistics. It's only like the community, the network that I entered the market, and from that, it was like a self driving mechanism. So I think the communities that you're part of. The second is the your life experiences. What do you know about the world that most people don't know? So what have you witnessed with your own eyes that will generate a lot of energy? Because we might see the same opportunity, but for some reason you have a crazy energy to execute on that opportunity, and that is usually a result of your past experiences, right? So that generates, like, if for example I'm an immigrant, so when I met Hakan, the founder of Auto One, and he didn't even have a company, nothing yet. He didn't have a PowerPoint presentation, no financial model. He only told me, I'm from Turkey, I'm in Germany now, I want to build a car auction company. I have a dream. I want to buy real estate for my entire family, that we can live in one place. I believe this is the future. I saw this in France and I saw this working in other markets. And I was sold at that moment. That was like, that's it. I said yes, and only then I started negotiating. Like, I said yes, and then I'm like, okay, I would like to have 10%. And then Hakan said, no, you will. The valuation of the company is 5 million. You will get only 5%. And then I said, let's meet in the middle, 7.5%. And Hakan said, look, Oskar, if I accept this offer, that would mean you invested in an entrepreneur who loses negotiations and gives in 50% just like that. Would you really want to invest in an entrepreneur like that? So I had no counter argument. So I invested 250,000 for 5%, and obviously the company became a 12 billion euro company listed in Germany just a few years later. So that was, I think that most people would have, rejected that opportunity and have rejected that opportunity. And it's my unique life experience. And the same happened with Flaschenpost, which was the quick commerce company in Germany that was sold for 1 billion to Dr. Oetker. When I met Dieter at that specific point of time, he was already rejected, I think, 100 times. And I immediately said yes. Immediately, like same meeting, because he was working in a warehouse. Because before that, I missed to invest in Delivery Hero, and Delivery Hero, I had an opportunity to invest at 5 million valuation, and I declined because it was a low AUV market. I said, you will have low AUVs, the unit economics will never work. And then it became a $20 billion company. So it was my biggest mistake. My biggest mistake. So when I met Dieter, and then he said he has a low average order value, but super high frequency, I was immediately triggered that to not make the same mistake again. So
So
I
in that
was in.
one, so to dive into that one, that's the idea more so than the jockey. How much do you look at it? And it sounds like you said if you just blindly invested at everything that came from your university network, you would have had this incredible index that would have performed 20% of all unicorns. How much is it the actual idea? How much is it just having a seat at the table? Or is it really just betting on the jockey? How do you think about that?
Yeah, I think to create an Olympic champion, you need good genetics and good discipline and good diet and good trainers. You need all of it. So in order to create a unicorn, you need the horse and the jockey. And the horse and the jockey actually go together, because a good jockey will not choose a bad horse. A good smart jockey will never ride on a sick horse. In my experience, it's easier to change the horse than to change the jockey. So every experience I had where you tried to replace the founder ended in very bad returns. And actually, to change the person, in YPO, we try to change very, we do all these forums. I did 150 forum meetings in the last 14 years, and I changed 1%. So it's really hard to change yourself. But it's very easy to change business model. So I think, in my experience, the unicorns in the world are born from the same business models over and over again, right? Cash and carry retail created maybe 50 unicorns in the world, the same business model with And it was all kinds of jockeys, but this horse created a lot of champions. And then obviously when you look at neo banking, for example, in each country, like even in Kazakhstan, Kaspi is actually $2 billion in profit in Kazakhstan with the neo banking business model, right? Like Nubank in Brazil. So even in small markets, you have $20 billion companies doing a good business model. So when you have a good business model, which is, for example, neo banking, credit led neo banking, it will produce maybe 50, 60 unicorns all around the world. So for me, I think a lot about the business model. Sometimes when you have a really good jockey, he will change horses until he finds something. I have a case in Australia right now. We failed the first business, then the founder created the second. I invested again in the second business. It failed again. Now he changed business model again. He created the third business, and again we are partners in this one. So with this particular jockey, I hope that sooner or later he will he will find the right horse. Yeah, but at the beginning you have as a business model, so you don't have a business, and the jockey is obviously when you make seed investments, you have more information on the jockey versus the horse.
Right.
So you judge basically the person and his ambition and his life story. I actually love to do lifeline with founders. I love it. I think it's one of the best ways to make a decision.
Right. Yeah. Really interesting. Um, you mentioned a lot of success stories, and then you just talked about one jockey that you've now backed 3 times, and you're hoping that you connect this time. Can you speak to some of the companies that you've backed, maybe even the ones that have hit unicorn valuations and then have failed? Let's walk
Yeah.
through some of the challenges. Go ahead.
My first ever unicorn, Daniel, was Fab.com. And Fab.com 12 years ago, when the term unicorn was invented, there was only 30 unicorns in the world. And Fab.com was one of them. And I was a shareholder of Fab.com, and it was valued 1.5 billion. And I was actually lucky enough to sell 30% of my stake at that valuation, and that was a very successful investment for me. But the remaining 70% went bankrupt. So the company went bankrupt just it went bankrupt about 5 or 6 months after being valued 1.5 billion. That was actually at that time considered absolutely impossible. Like people could not believe this is possible, that this could happen, and it did happen. So the business model just didn't scale. They invested 5 times more, but the revenue didn't increase. The losses scaled, and the company went into like it just completely ran against the wall. And that was quite a big shock that just 1.5 billion of value can just disappear. And this year, obviously, I have the case of TradeX, which was a Canadian company, which is a cross-border used car exchange, and it was also a billion-dollar company. And now, in my books, being zero after defaulting on one of its loans, unexpectedly not meeting covenants, and then just running into a cash squeeze situation. And that's very sad because all the stakeholders, employees and partners and customers, I mean, it's sometimes it happens like instantly. It was very unexpected for most shareholders that this happened. So it was you can hire 10 historians, they will each come up with a different story why this happened. And I, but this is part of life. And for me, I feel very bad, as a lot of angels have only one unicorn. Like out of all angels, there's millions of angels, and only a couple thousand have ever been shareholder of a unicorn company. And then out of those, 90% have only one. And you're lucky if you get to see one in your lifetime. And then if that company dies, it's obviously a horror scenario, right? So this is something I experienced firsthand. 12 years ago, and it was a shock for me because my net worth at that time, I think it went down by 80% or something like that, if I would calculate it properly. So that's also why one of my missions, like the community aspect and the risk element, is one of the reasons why I'm on a mission now to unite the top angels in the world in order to create a risk sharing community, right? Where we can get together and think, if each of us has one unicorn, how can we come together to, share upside, downside, and reduce the risk for everyone. But the main motivation for me is to create a community of the best business angels in the world where we can co-invest together. And as I explained, all my success in the past, I know you have your history with being in Airbnb. You have this Airbnb mafia, right? Where you became extremely, maybe you can tell the story from this perspective. How successful is the Airbnb mafia?
Yeah, it's been great to see some of the success. I mean, the first massive success within the Airbnb alumni network was Coinbase, right? So the founder of Coinbase was going around Airbnb giving uh, Bitcoin to other colleagues just to have them adopt this technology, and a lot of that was just lost, right? Because the technology was so hard to use. But obviously, Coinbase, massive, massive success story. Going back to the mission that you're on now, on creating this community that you can maximize the success of angels. And I remember hearing that there's more Olympic gold medalists than there are unicorns in the world, right? So it's extremely difficult. And like you
Much
said,
more.
yeah, much more. So you hit one unicorn. It's very rare that you're going to hit more than one. You're at 14, which is great, but most people aren't diversified. So would love for you to share a little bit more of what we're doing in Italy and this community that you've built in Accumulator.
I mean, the idea is everybody who's doing angel investing realizes that it's like a power law game. So it's all about the home runs. It's not about the failures. It's all only about the home runs, because the home runs generate 95% of your returns as one company usually. And that company also becomes like 95% of your angel wealth. And once that value is created, I really recommend everybody who gets into this situation to start selling 30 to 70% of at every opportunity you have. Every opportunity you have. If you really believe in the company, sell 30% of your stake. If you uh, if you have mixed feelings about the company, sell 70% of this, but never sell 100 and never sell zero. Try to sell 30 to 70% to reshuffle the risk ratio. And what we have created, and that's why we met in Italy, obviously, is that we have a fund to get where we can share uh, share the risk, and basically you can change some of your unicorn equity, exchange it against LP units in a common fund that is owned and managed by the community. And this allows anybody to diversify out of a wealth concentration. So if you have too much wealth concentration, you can diversify without cash, because obviously the last 2 years have been a desert for business angels. So it has been exactly 2 years now that there's almost no exits, no IPOs, and no exits. And angels very much depend, because they invest their own money, they depend on exits to fund their next, ideas and ventures and entrepreneurs. So I really want to, stabilize angels to make them more successful. So I want to help bring angels together, create billions of dollars of cash flow for angels that we share and invest again back into the ecosystem.
Yeah, and there's such incredible people that were in the room. So I remember having one conversation, and the person was the first investor in Miro, and a sub $2 million valuation. I didn't even know that valuations could be that low, which is amazing. And now Miro, of course, is a $17 billion company, and it's just a rule of angel investing, or just investing in general, is diversification. It's so often it's hard to actually sell because you feel like you have a winner, and maybe greed kicks in, or just uh, blind optimism to some extent when things can change super quickly, like you mentioned. What's crazy when things do change quickly, such a massive ripple effect for better or for worse, depending on the outcome. From here, we're going to open it up to questions from the audience. So I see a bunch of questions coming in. Thanks for asking those questions. The first one is, do you have a number one question that you ask founders? Should investors be asking that one specific question, regardless of who's in front of them?
Yeah, I like to talk about dreams. What is your dream? What is your why? What is your ultimate goal? What is the end? What is the end goal? And I really like to understand. Like usually, I ask entrepreneurs to tell me three stories about their life. It's almost like doing lifeline. So you draw the lines, and then you like what are the three stories you would like to tell me? And out of millions of stories that everybody has to tell, founders for some reason choose three, and they're always different. And this is a very very important aspect. And if these three stories make sense in terms of what he wants to build, if there's like synchronicity, like if there's some uh, life logic that matches the company's logic, that's really a strong positive thing. And then I really like to explore something in which the founder is not normal. So in what, like if you would take all psychological tests and all tests in the world, where would you come out in the top 0.1 percentile? It doesn't matter what it is, but I found that unicorn founders are not normal in something. They can be normal in 100 dimensions, but usually they have one dimension where they are abnormal, really really outlier. And this is something that is very important. If I see any sign that shows that somebody is really on the edge in one thing, that's enough for me to
Can
make
you
a
give an
bet.
example of that? A real example of one of your unicorn investments where you've noticed that early on and how the investor or the entrepreneur was not normal and on the edge?
Yeah, so it's a funny story. Maybe I shouldn't tell it, but I will. So we went with this founder. We went to a nightclub, and he talked to every single girl in the nightclub. He just went out and he spoke to every girl in the nightclub, every single one, like, except of the ones that were in pairs. And I was watching that, and I was like, wow. I'm gonna invest. I'm gonna invest in this guy. He's obviously very outgoing and extroverted, and like risk ability was very high. Yeah. So then you have, Dita from Flash and Post, who was working from a warehouse. It's also not common for hyped internet startup founders to be working out of a warehouse, which I found. He actually created a warehouse company now, which is his fourth company. Um, yeah, and I mean, you can tell some of this outlier. Some people are world champions in gaming, and it's also a great result, right? Even somebody is extremely introverted, extremely uh, even extremely low on ability to communicate with people. I have found that to be extremely valuable. So it doesn't matter if you are to the positive side or to the so-called negative side. Both sides of the table work.
Yeah, that's so interesting. There's a question here of just how much competition there is for funding right now, especially in AI. This is sounds like this question's from the entrepreneur's perspective. So, how do you differentiate today and get noticed when you're raising capital? How do you think about running a process from an entrepreneur's perspective?
So my biggest principle in investing is a proactive approach. So when I made so the usual approach that 99% of investors have is to look at deal flow that comes to you in some way or another, and then invest or make decisions to invest. And I think this is a losing strategy. unless you're plugged into the best community in the world, like Airbnb alumni or Stanford or WHU or McKinsey, Boston Consulting Group, something like that. So what I do is I proactively go after the opportunities that I want to invest in. So I call it sniper strategy. So it's almost, I have a small team, I have small resources compared to all the resources in the world. So I look for what I would like to build, and I find out who is building this already, and then I reach out to those entrepreneurs. I don't wait for them to reach out to me. So I all my investments are, except of community investments, are proactive investments. That's kind of how you escape the competition. You have your own life, your own flow that you proactively drive, I think. And the same is true for the entrepreneur side. Obviously, you have to market your company and go after every investor that you want. Probably a bad idea to wait for me to hunt for you.
Yeah, I will say just because now there's 1,500 plus YPOers and angels in YPO. And so often every day I have an outreach from a YPOer who asks me about raising money and how to run a process. In fact, that people don't ask about how to run a process; they just ask about raising money. And typically, you have these incredible entrepreneurs who have bootstrapped their company in the past, and they've had wildly successful businesses that they've built or that they've ran, and now they're looking to start something venture backed. And in my experience, often people will reach out to investors and have conversations here and there, but nothing will actually get done because they're not actually creating a sense of urgency. And often they don't. Unfortunately, venture is so closed, right? It's very much an insider's game. So one tactic that I personally use that has worked well is reaching out to founders who have been backed by the investors that you want. So don't reach out directly to investors because I'm sure Oskar, your inbox is similar where there's a bunch of cold outreach and it's really hard to pay attention to it. But if a founder that you've back reached out saying, hey, here's a company that might be interesting for you to take a look at, especially a founder who's made you money, you're probably going to pay attention. So this is a great hack for anyone who isn't in the inner circle of venture capital. There's tools like Signal, many tools online that you can actually do some desktop research, even ask ChatGPT, who are the best investors in the world, to back your strategy. And then look at two founders that they've backed and do a cold email to that founder if you don't have any mutual connections, saying that you're looking to raise money from that investor. Can we jump on a 15-minute reference call to see if they're the right fit as a capital partner for what you're building? And I've noticed there's probably about a 50% batting average for cold outreach to founders because they know how important it is to take the right source of capital. And then asking at the end not to just be blindly introduced, but asking for that founder to send affordable email on their behalf, asking for the investor to opt in. So for anyone, hopefully I just saved many conversations, but that's one workaround. And of course, living on LinkedIn, seeing who mutual connections are. If anyone's in YPO, you're pretty much in the inner circle. It's just a matter of getting to the right people. So we have a ton of questions. We're not going to be able to get through all these. But
I do. By the way, I do the exact same as you just described. The stereotype is that entrepreneurs go after investors and have to get these introductions and so on. But I do the exact same thing as on the investor side. So I try to get introductions to founders, and I work very hard to get into specific situations that I would like. So I don't sit back and wait for people to introduce. Like it's really I reach out to people, ask to introduce me, ask for references as an investor, even though the stereotype is that supposedly the power is with the money. But in my mind, the power is with entrepreneurs who are unicorn founders.
it's so interesting. I think in pretty much every one of the fireside chats, now 4 years of monthly events like this, the theme that just keeps coming up is a big part of angel investing is having a seat at the table, is actually having the access to deal flow. It's not a matter of being incredible at picking companies, but how do you actually get a seat at the table? And a big part of that is hustle, right? So a recent event, we were talking to the first investor in Spotify. and the amount of times that he would just go and hang out outside of their office at the coffee shop that the founders and executives would go to and bump in and have conversations, even though he never even lived in that city, right? So I want to transition now to athletics because there's been a few conversations around this and we can always transition back. But as an extreme sport athlete, skydiver, motor racer, we have world record for rowing, a world record that you still hold to this day that no one's been able to beat. How do you tie your athletics ambition to your professional vision?
Yeah, the good news is that business angel investing is compatible with other interests in life. Whereas when I was building companies, when I was a founder CEO, it was not compatible. It was like 100-hour weeks where you always feel out of control of your time. So when you're business angel investors, you can alternate. So you can have periods of high activity, periods of low activity, and you can have so-called mini lives. So what I do is I have periods where I just focus on sports and nothing else. And then I have periods again where I, do 100-hour sprints to find the best entrepreneurs in the world. So it's like an on off, and it's kind of under your control. That's how I find um, being an athlete and a business angel is compatible, and it's possible to do that.
There is so much wisdom in that. I would love for you to go a layer deeper because it'd be easy for people to potentially not get the nuggets that came from that because you have a very contrarian view when it comes to use the word alternating. Most people think about balance or work life integration where everything needs to be in harmony, right? There's not these intense bursts of an ebb and flow of your energy and focus. So maybe you can share a little bit more of what it means to alternate because this is something that I've never heard other people talk about before. It's not there's not a ton of books on this topic. It's something that is quite unique.
Yeah. I mean, in YPO, there's the top two questions that we cover in forums. The first is what's next, and the second is how to find balance. It's the most common question. And in the pursuit of balance, we try to find the perfect settings that will kind of complete the puzzle, like Tetris game where everything falls into place. And what I have found is that these settings don't exist. It's impossible. The puzzle is unsolvable. And it's only solvable in a dynamic view where you actually alternate, just like in sports, where you have cycles, microcycles, macrocycles. It's for everything in life, where you don't have one modus operandi that balances out all your different goals, but you have different modus operandi and you alternate them. So you have one business, let's call it beast mode. Beast mode is a very good modus operandi for founders, and it's impossible to build something without beast mode. But but if you try to like sustain beast mode for 3 years, you're going to burn out. So beast mode is only possible if you have, let's call it, Zen mode. So if you alternate Zen mode and beast mode, you can actually balance over time, but not by finding the perfect settings, but finding the perfect protocol. Just like when you breathe a certain way, you get activated. When you breathe a different way, you get calm. So just like the heart is working, it has a contraction phase and the relaxation phase. So that's kind of the answer that I found for balance. And it's very much it's very difficult to do when you are out of control in a founder type of situation. But when you are in control in a business angel type of situation, you can actually plan these periods with high certainty.
I love it, and I feel like this is an entire event in and amongst itself that I hope we can host one day. We're going to wrap it up here. I know there's a ton of questions that we're not going to be able to answer, but maybe, Oskar, there's an opportunity for us to go through the chat and start answering some of them. One just came in. I'm curious to hear your thoughts. This can be the last question before we wrap up, but what's the best way to approach advisory shares? And I do want to just mention there's one community that's built on top of our group that we've referred a bunch of people to. It's called Supernova. It's almost like the Y Combinator of growth stage companies. So onesupernova.com is the URL. And that's where you get advisory shares to advise high growth, super impactful tech companies. But how do you think about advisory shares compared to just writing a check, Oskar?
So my rule of thumb is I never take advisory shares. I never take shares for free. I always buy my shares. And that's kind of my philosophy. The first reason is adverse selection. I think the people who give out shares for free are usually not the top percentile, but that's might be different. There's an entire culture now of having advisors and having them incentivized. But the second reason, usually there's big expectations behind these advisory shares. So people who give out the advisory shares usually have all kinds of fantasies and dreams about what you can do, and these fantasies are rarely satisfied. So when I buy my shares, I still can mentor and help, and it's all a bonus. It's all a bonus on top. So the relationship with the founder is always super positive because I bought the shares for money and then everything else is a bonus. Whereas if he comes in with expectations, I will not be able to meet his expectations. 90%. So that's my approach, and I know other people have done extremely well with advisory shares, but my and I do exceptions when I have people who really know me well and they know exactly what they will receive from me as a mentor.
Yeah, adverse selection is the biggest challenge with everything surrounding angel investing, and advising is probably adverse selection on steroids, right? So
Yeah.
this has been awesome, Oskar. Thanks so much. Is there anything else that you'd like to share that I didn't ask you before we wrap up here?
I one question that I saw in the messages is about real estate. It's actually my biggest focus is real estate, this technology and disruption of asset management and property management. So at the moment, I believe that the real estate management, ownership, property management it's very far behind than the net promoter scores of renters and all the tenants and everybody is so low. It's in the negative 30s, so it has to be disrupted. Obviously property tech is at the moment in a major crisis. All public prop tech companies are down like 85%, 90%, but I think this will happen. So I'm super positive on prop tech. And then there was a question about angels and YPO. Obviously, both Daniel and I, we are building communities for angels. So please feel free to reach out. All our contacts are available. And we would love to, we do forums and dinners just like in forum style for angels, where we really discuss the real stories of angel investing. And I think it's super special. I have found that these forums for angels have been so valuable, and people really get a lot of value out of those. So we kind of try the forum format for angels. Yeah,
Yeah,
thank you
thank
very
you.
much, Daniel. I mean, you are super active. The interview could have been the other way around. You have so much experience and so many co-investments, and you united. I really want to say thank you to you because you united the ununited. There was no angel community inside YPO before Daniel, and now it's thriving. So it's really
Yeah,
great.
it's been so much fun. So thank you. And every time we do any type of event, there's such a flood of gratitude. So it's such a special seat to be in, and I'm forever grateful for it. Oskar, is it too premature to mention about your event that's happening in Spain next year?
I
Or
think what is interesting is the YPO event in Dubai this year, 7th to 9th of November. There's the Global Business Summit, and everybody is coming to Dubai. Obviously, it's my home, and I really look forward to seeing everybody. We will organize some angel events in Dubai for that time period, so please reach out if you're around.
Amazing. All right. Sounds great. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate all the questions and interaction. Oskar, thanks again. This has been awesome. All the best.